What up, guys? Welcome to the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, episode 330. Today we have Dr. Mike. What is his last name?
Mike Piekarski.
Mike Piekarski, who goes by the Instagram title of Dr. Kickass. So he's a PT and a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu like Eugene, and they've done some work together. And we're going to talk to him on the podcast, a little bit about his start in Jiu-Jitsu, but mainly we're going to talk about, things that people do in Jiu-Jitsu and things you could do in Jiu-Jitsu to have longevity, right? Because he's 39, I'm 39, Eugene's 41. And as you start climbing up the age bracket, you start to get more focused on, I just want to keep doing this thing, because when you're young, you have this body that just seems to work forever and nothing ever seems to go wrong with it. Then you get older and you're like, I need to protect this damn thing. And so we're going to talk about a lot of different things related to prehab, rehab, maintenance of the body, how to improve things, longevity tips, things of that nature. And we'll also talk about some of the things that annoy him and why he basically gets really angry at knee brace companies. So for a lot of you guys that just are always wearing knee braces and stuff like that, that part might be pretty interesting to you. So we'll get into it in just a minute. Big thanks to you guys for joining us, and big thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Again, one of our main sponsors is Charlotte's Web. They've been with us for several years. Again, we took them on as a sponsor and started using their products back in 2018, I think it was. Very early.
It's been a long time.
Very early on, right? And again, I liked it because I had sort of liked CBD products. Came in contact with them. I liked them, but I found that, a lot of times the local products I would use, they were kind of, what's the word? They were inconsistent, yeah. Right? Which is it's an issue with it not being FDA regulated, but they're very stringent with their testing. And they third party test it, and they also, the people down at Charles Webb's are geeks about producing a high quality product, and they're always coming out with new stuff all the time. And again, I like CBD from a standpoint from the longevity standpoint, right? It's not going to, make you stronger and make you lift more weight or whatever, but like, I found that from the recovery standpoint, I notice a benefit there, and that's why I use it. And from an older standpoint, that's something that's kind of important, right? Yep. And so again, if you guys want to check out any of their products, I encourage people to try supplements out and see what you think. Don't trust my experience from it. Again, listen to your body, try it out, see what you think. But there's a lot of people that have used the products over the years. They enjoy it. I get messages from a number of you guys who will order it routinely and send me a message and tell me thank you for recommending the products. I've gotten a lot of benefit from it. So if you want to check out their website, go to charlottesweb.com, and the promo code at checkout to save 30% is Chewjitsu30. CHEWJITSU30. And if you order some of the Charlotte's Web products, you use the promo code, send us a copy of your receipt either to the Jiu-Jitsu Podcast Instagram or to jiujiitsupodcast@gmail.com, and we will send you a free bonus video series, again, just as a special thank you. Also, thanks to our friends over at epicrollbjj.com. Again, Epic Roll is a jiu-jitsu brand gear company, right? They make basically anything and everything that you might want related to jiu-jitsu, from t-shirts to rash guards to gis, and they have great customer service, great quality stuff. I get all of my rash guards currently made through them because I like the designs, I like the quality, and again, it's been great working with Matt and his crew. So again, if you guys want to check out any of their stuff, if you're looking for a new rash guard, new gi, whatever it might be, it rhymed. You can check it over at epicrollbjj.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu20, CHEWJITSU20, and you can save 20% off the order on whatever you buy. And guys, if you want to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. There's a bunch of perks for getting into the Patreon there. But again, if you want to support the podcast that you listen to, on a weekly basis, and you'd like to get some perks for it and like to get some stuff, then go to the website, patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, and go through it, check it out. You can see the price that's very inexpensive, and you can see the different perks that it comes up with. Also, guys, if you would like to get my daily Chew Crew email, the letter that I send out to everybody, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN. Again, the letter that I send out daily ranges and topics. I always sort of bring it back to jiu-jitsu. Sometimes it's very, very specific to jiu-jitsu. Other times you'll see me sort of sharing some Stoic philosophy thing that I read in like Seneca's letters, or I was reading Ernest Becker's book one day and I shared that book. And then other times it's checklists of stuff to bring to competitions. It can be anything and everything, but it's stuff that I think might help you either from your training standpoint or, maybe a mindset principle or something like that. But anyway, if you want to check it out and get the daily letter, I'll also give you a couple free ebooks that'll help you with your game plan and also with your drilling in jiu-jitsu. You can check it out at jiu-jitsu.net/join, and you can join up and get the letters, and you can unsubscribe at any time. But with that said, guys, thank you so much for being here. Let's talk to Dr. Kickass.
I got Chewy on doing all like the pails, rails, and cars and stuff, and like just like
it's great.
Every time we do it at he runs these camps, so I'm always like I'm doing the routines, and everybody gets all like, all right, everybody be easy, because nobody's used to doing it. People get sore and stuff afterwards, but it's pretty much like doing like a kin stretch, essentially a kin stretch sequence and stuff. But
everybody seems to enjoy it. I mean, it's good stuff because it's the stuff like we do that is like a warm-up now. Like like the gym, we'll just pick certain ones and like I go through it, and it's like bang for your buck, right? Like, pretty quick. You can get it done relatively in a short process, and you feel pretty good and ready to go afterwards, opposed to like, a lot of the old, static stretching and stuff that we used to do back in the days, like relatively useless. And I mean, it has its purpose if you're like, especially post and stuff, but like right before, it's just not as effective. And honestly, I feel like my body actually seems to feel better using some of that activation stuff.
What I usually do is I'll pick like 2 or 3 cars relative to like whatever I'm teaching for the class. So if it's like hip stuff, or, we're doing guard, I do a hip, leg locks, I'll do ankle, knee, something relative to them,
Yeah. So the challenge, and you can tell me what you think. The challenge for me is like making it digestible for the everyday jiu-jitsu practitioner, right? Because like we have so much, and Chewy's like, dude, you have so much shit in your brain, like so much stuff you want to get out, and like trying to give them, like we said, best bang for your buck, not to make it overly complicated and make it easy enough to where people will actually use it and use it effectively. And that's kind of the challenge I think we have all the time, because people just want to go out and do jiu-jitsu, and that's all they think about.
You guys are like black belts, right? You're like black belts. And then it's like for most people that you guys are working with, they're essentially white belts as far as all this stuff is concerned. And like it's like, giving like a brand new white belt who's never like done much of anything, and then basically letting them watch like a John Danaher video. It's going to be like, whoa, what am I like, what is all this, right? The verbiage, everything. Whereas like, if you can explain it to them like they're children, and then also just kind of like, I mean, being honest, right? And giving it to them like simple, like in simple digestible terms, I think it's really useful. Man, how did you get started with jiu-jitsu and everything else?
Yeah. So I started jiu-jitsu originally when I was in high school. I always wanted to do martial arts, grew up on Ninja Turtles and Jean-Claude Van Damme movies.
How old are you?
39.
30. Oh yeah. Perfect timing. What was your birthday?
December.
Okay, yeah. So you grew up in like the golden era, blood sport, and everything's coming up when we're kids. Hell
yes. So I grew up with that, and so I was trying out like all sorts of like hokey martial arts, because you don't know any better when you're a kid. And I was doing kung fu, and I ended up having some knee issues, so my kneecap would slide out of place. And it was a long thing where I tried a year of rehab, but like when you're like 14, you don't take it super seriously. I ended up needing surgery. So that kind of like took me out of it until I ended up getting to college. And I did a little kung fu, and then I did a little Japanese jiu-jitsu. And then, fast forward, I get to college. I show up to college, and there's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It was like, well, I did Japanese jiu-jitsu. It must be the same thing. And I remember my first class, and this is like, it's kind of crazy how it was like back in the day, because I was in school like early 2000. So I was taught by a white belt. It was like, I'm surprised we're not all crippled. But
what part of the country are you in?
I was upstate New York. That's where I grew up.
Okay, yeah. So probably not like the Brazilians that hadn't been sort of like where they sort of like got to yet. So you guys probably got all the later on probably got like second generation guys out there.
Yeah. So I remember my first day of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I was like, holy shit, this is like what I've been looking for the last, my whole life. And
Mhm.
well, I'm like a small, unathletic guy too. So like for jiu-jitsu, it's like perfect where I'm like, I actually feel like I can do something. You know what I mean? Versus like when you take some of the other martial arts where, like you take other martial arts where like, I mean, obviously size matters, right? But like
Yeah, it
you have
does.
to be significantly better to beat someone who's bigger
Yep.
versus jiu-jitsu, that isn't always the case. So I'm
Well, and I mean, in some sports, if you're not big enough, it's just a physical like impossibility. It's not happening for you. Like if it's like, let's say, for instance, if your dream is to be an NFL player and you're 5'6" and you weigh 150, just not, it's not happening. It just isn't, right? So you're going to have to find another sport. Whereas jiu-jitsu, it's like, okay, like, you have whatever sort of hand you're dealt, you can, adjust it to your style and make it work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously you could be a teacher or competitor, and you could almost argue that the smaller people are better teachers, right? Because just for them to like they have to be more technical versus when you're bigger, there are attributes. So I think it's all, it's almost harder for a big guy because they have to learn how to not use their size, which I mean it matters, right? You know what I mean? So so I was in college, I started to like it, and then I graduate college, I find a gym outside. And that's at this point, like you know how most people like you're white belts, but like you're all in at that point. Like I was one of those guys.
Oh yeah.
And I was working with my coach at the time. He was because this was like early 2000s where there was no amateur MMA, so he went straight pro and he was a purple belt. You know what I mean? So I was the same size as him, so I ended up just being his training partner. But this is back in the day where it just I just get beat up. And then at one point he goes, "Hey, have you ever thought about fighting?" And I was like, I'm like this nerdy dude, like not athletic. And I was like, I mean, if you think I'm ready. So then I started obviously focusing on that. Because I think jiu-jitsu is a little bit different now. Like when I started, like jiu-jitsu is like about fighting. Like I want to learn how to fight, how to defend myself. Like obviously a jiu-jitsu competition is geared towards that. But like, it was like, can I like actually use this in like a real application? You know what I mean? So that's why I was really drawn to actually do MMA.
Yeah. What about like so you were you actually graduated from school or even PT school at the time when you took your fights, or when was that in the whole process?
So I graduated undergrad, and then like, there was that period of like, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. Like I was like thinking at one point, like, do I want to try to open a jiu-jitsu gym? Do I want to try to be like a professional fighter? And like when I would train, so I would train in a local gym, and then like the coach would go down to like train with some pros in New Jersey. So I would train with like UFC fighters, AMA Fight Club. So it was like Jim Miller and Charlie Brenneman. So I'd see these like high level fighters. But then you'd see a lot of the other fighters that were not quite UFC, and you could see like, they're taking like short notice fights or taking fights on injuries. It's like they were just those guys just not good enough to get in the UFC. And then it's like, man, like that's kind of like a hard life. It's either even when you get in the UFC, especially at the time, it's like
especially back then, right? Because the money still wasn't great back then.
Yeah, for sure. But even like entry level UFC at the time, I don't know if it's different now, but it was like 10,000 fight, 10,000 to win. You have 3 fights a year, and then you have like, your sponsors. A good year, you're making like 66 grand a year. But like, if you're not winning every fight, you're not getting, 3 fights a year. Like that's a hard way to make a living, And I'm at a point where I was good enough at jiu-jitsu where I could like compete in MMA, but like not good enough where I could make a living. And then once I realized that, then I was like, man, I got to think about another backup. And I didn't really want to stay in upstate New York. Like it was just, I mean, it might be different now, but there's just nothing there. And I just was like, I kind of want to leave. And if I opened a gym at this point, you're pretty much stuck. Like you're not going to move. So then I started looking into like, well, maybe I want to be a personal trainer, something where I could still try to compete, And then ironically, what I did was I started applying to a physical therapy assistant job, not knowing that you actually need a degree for it. And then like someone responds like, you need like a degree and a certification. I was like, oh, okay. So I was looking into that. I was actually trying to be a physical therapy assistant because I didn't really want to accumulate all this debt from PT school. And so I'm like observing, and then this one person was like this physical therapist. And at the time it was funny because I knew nothing. I'm watching, physical therapy, and I was like, I think I could do this right now without an education. I mean, again, I didn't know the intricacies of physical therapy, right?
Yeah.
And then they're like, you already have a bachelor's degree, just go and get, your doctorate. And then I thought about it, and I kind of realized like I don't really like to listen to someone else. I like doing what I think is best. So I went all in. I went physical therapy, and at the time I was still hoping to fight, but I mean, you fought MMA. It's one of those things. If you're not going to go all in, don't do it. And that's kind of where I was at. And then I kind of switched gears. And, I didn't even think about like combining physical therapy and jiu-jitsu. I just thought that there was enough similarity at the time that like it would, there was a synergy where I was interested in. And then, as I graduated from physical therapy school, like I realized jiu-jitsu is growing. And, like, I mean, you could talk to Eugene, like there's just not that many people who are high level jiu-jitsu guys who are also physical therapists. Generally, you have someone who's like a white belt in jiu-jitsu, or you have those guys who are black belts in jiu-jitsu who like don't really know anything about physical therapy. So I realized I kind of fell into this weird niche, and then I just kind of started riding that train since then.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's like the thing, like it's just one of those things where, what did you accumulate knowledge in? And a lot of times if you went all in on fighting or jiu-jitsu or whatever, you probably didn't have the bandwidth, to go all in on something else like doctorate school or whatever. Right. Sure. So it's cool you have it, and you can give people information on how the body works, because, a lot of times there's a lot of people, we have this beautiful machine that we're born into, right? And like a lot of us don't know how that actually works, how things work, how muscles work, why are things tight, why do things sometimes get aggravated. And so like that was one thing when I started working with Eugene, like figuring out like how different muscle groups, like in the front being tight, will then create issues in the back, and how the hips being tight here create issues, downstream, and vice versa, and trying to fix those things out. So for a lot of jiu-jitsu guys, if they were a little bit more, because again, what does everybody want to do? They want to be able to train for a long time.
Sure.
And so if they actually got resources from guys like you two, and actually, were consistent with them for a long time, they would be able to train a lot more and be a little bit more, have a lot more longevity in it, but it's not necessarily the most fun stuff to do.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you guys know it's like you see these black belts. Generally what happens is people start, they're training, they accumulate these injuries, and now like they have to modify their game, right? Because they have these injuries. And then you see those, like, it's pretty common to see those like older black belts that are all they really do is, knee shield, half guard, because that's all their body will let them do anymore, right? Like their elbows don't lock any, they can't straighten their elbow. So their game becomes so finite, not because like that's just all their body will let them do. And I kind of, it's obviously not an ideal thing, right? Like you have to take, jiu-jitsu is so vast of all the different things you can do, and to have your body limit what you can do is, just a shame.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of feeds into itself. If you're only able to do certain things, you're going to start doing those similar patterns, and you're going to kind of probably create some maybe overuse patterns as well.
Sure.
So having the ability to vary your game, we talk about kind of rotating the tires. You can kind of try to get more life out of your body. If you can do different things, work different games, you can kind of squeeze more and do more, and hopefully like keep more maintenance and keep your body together for longer.
Absolutely.
So I had this whole physical therapy and jiu-jitsu moment. Actually, I have one specific memory. We're actually working with Chewy, and this was years ago when he was still fighting. He had a tweak to his knee, and he had me. It was before a fight, and I kind of messed with him a little bit.
Let me share this with you.
Right,
So here's what you did to me. So I have a fight coming up, pro fight, and I'm training my face off, overtraining like pretty much every MMA fighter does, right? And then my knee was just bugging me, and I didn't know what it was. And then of course, getting ready for the fight, because it's the week of, this is like growing in my mind. Oh man, there's something really wrong with this thing. I'm really messed up. And so Eugene starts coming in there, and he's doing his little tests and pushing around, and like, does this hurt? And he keeps giving me this, like giving me this look, like, I don't know, man. Like, so then of course, like, I'm like, tell me something, like, don't tell me it's really messed up, whatever. So man, he's like, you know what? He's like, you want me to give you my honest opinion, bro? And I'm like, yeah, man, what's going on with it? He goes, well, I think you're going to kick ass this weekend. Your knee's fine. Probably. I was like, you motherfucker. Like I was about to like just choke him out right there, but he set me up for it.
No, so I feel like I didn't I don't know if I gave him any confidence or anything in that moment.
No, it did. It was like, let me know that everything was fine.
But for me, I was like, I did that. And then I had some moments like, you know, obviously people learn, and you probably had the same experience at the gym. People hear that you're a physical therapist and they're like, hey, look at this, look at that, look at this. And Chewy's like, hey, man, you have a lot of expertise in this thing. Like, have you ever thought kind of, you know, using your expertise in jiu-jitsu and creating something out of that? And I was like, oh, shit. Like, I never thought about charging people or using my time specifically to kind of work with jiu-jitsu athletes. And I was like, I love these two things. Like, how can I combine them? And for you, was there a moment that you're like, man, I want to like go all in or try to create this thing to share knowledge and get people, you know, healthier on the mats?
Well, I think it was kind of similar with like, you know, I'd be on the, you know, at first I just wanted to help people. There was a jiu-jitsu guy. I'm like, oh man, come see me. This is cool. You know, people, and I would be doing these assessments like on the side of the mat. But then what happened, and I don't know, obviously it's different because you have kids and, you know, but like when I was a physical therapist, like early on, like I'm working a ton. I really wasn't able to train as much as I liked. And it was like really infuriating because I'm like, all I really want to do is jiu-jitsu, and I'm getting like, you know, 2 days a week in. I'm like, this sucks. And then, you know, between roles, someone comes and asks me a question or after, and I was like, essentially it was like eating into my training time. And then I got to a point I was like, look, like I have a very finite amount of training time. This is really important to me. So if you don't value me, like, you know, I'm not going to help you. So I kind of had to, I didn't say it like that, but it was essentially like, if you want to come see me, like come pay. Right. And you know, I've worked in places where, you know, especially at the time, like, you know, I was an insurance-based place. So it's like, if you have insurance, come see me. Like, you have no excuse. You know what I mean? Now my situation's a little bit different, and I have a lot more free time, and I can train more, but I've accumulated so much knowledge at this point where it's like, again, if you do jiu-jitsu and you can come see me, like there's not that many people, like I said, that have this knowledge. Like, I want to be paid for my time. So it was more of a, out of necessity that I ended up developing this, just because like I don't have the time to train, and that's what I do.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because I mean, you know, we pay everyone for their time. We go if we wanted to, like, you know, still our black belt for an hour to go over something, we're going to pay them for their time. If we have some guy who can take really good pictures and we have a wedding, we're going to pay him for his time. Like, so you have this knowledge that you paid thousands and thousands of dollars to get, right? So of course, like, you should be paid for it. Curious for you guys, what are some of like the biggest mistakes people make when it comes to like recovery, rehab, or like dealing with certain aches and pains that they have? Because, you know, I'm sure you guys see people doing things and you probably look at it and go, man, that's just not the right thing to do. You probably leave it alone most of the time. But what are some of the mistakes you guys see people make when they approach that kind of stuff?
You want to go first? You want me to go?
There you go.
Okay, so two things I would say. One, I mean, in a perfect world, you'd get assessed to know what it is, because how do you know what's like an injury versus like something that's like minor, right? So that's going to be a big one. Like, how serious is it? And then I would say two, people confusing the difference between exercise recovery and injury recovery. So it's like they do something where it's like, well, this is good. You know, I'll do foam rolling because it's good for exercise recovery, but it's an actual injury. So it's like, you know, you might temporarily reduce the pain at the moment, but you're not actually doing anything to address the injury. So, you know, I know it's a, you know, it's a little bit of a loaded question, but perfect world, I would know what the injury is so I could give them better advice on how to handle it.
I got you. So basically, like, if you get something that's kind of nagging you a bit, and instead of just like fiddling around with it, get someone to assess it and figure out, hey, this is an actual tear, or this is a whatever, or no, man, it's something very minor.
Yeah. It was actually interesting. There was a guy who reached out to me. He's like, I got shoulder pain. I was like, all right, well, I got to do an assessment. He's like, yeah, I don't have time for that. It would be like going to jiu-jitsu. If someone goes to YouTube and says, like, my guard passing's bad. And you're like, okay, well, what's your guard passing? It's like, no. Just make it better.
Yeah, right. So. Yeah, it's like, right. Then, you know, I think that sometimes goes to the mentality of, like, you know, people don't think about it. Like, they always want a simple fix, a quick 1 second hack or a pill. It's like, man, like, it didn't. This took probably, more than likely, in most cases, it took time for you to, you know, bang your body up, and it's going to take time to fix you. So, you got to be willing to put that time in.
There's a lot of fear for people, I think, like that. they've had bad experiences with doctors and physicians that don't understand jiu-jitsu, and they're afraid they're going to go to a doctor and they're going to say, just stop training or stop doing what you want to do. And that's like the worst thing you can tell a jiu-jitsu person. Like I'm always like, if we're going to shut it down, we're going to try everything else before, unless it's a serious injury, we're going to do everything else before that. I think, Mike, you're right in the fact that like a lot of people don't take the time to get it assessed and evaluated, because we can't give you, based on your symptoms, there's certain things they can present a certain way, but be different diagnoses. So that's one. The other thing, I think there's a misconception about physical therapy, and the fact that people think that once they're injured, they need physical therapy. I think physical therapy, or some of these ideas that Mike and I, some of our treatment strategies actually align pretty well, is that there's a lot of things you can do to hopefully mitigate injuries. So there's things that you can do to kind of keep injuries at bay, or keep them from, hopefully decrease the risk of them popping up. And so kind of like maintenance type stuff. So there's things you can do for maintenance and getting assessed. Even like sometimes I'll say, like going to the dentist, if you get your teeth cleaned, you don't always go to the dentist once you have a cavity, you go to get like maintenance. So like seeing someone that knows how the body moves, and they can check for any kind of issues that may be starting to peek their head out, but aren't really painful or causing problems at the time. You can hopefully correct some of those things and mitigate some of those things. So I don't know your thoughts.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And we can kind of build off that, like off with maintenance, but across the board of almost every sporting activity, the number one risk factor for an injury is a previous injury. Meaning like it didn't rehab. Like those people who like, oh, I sprained my ankles a dozen times. What the problem is that ligament got stretched out. It never really gained resilience where it was pre-injury. So that's the problem. And like we could take it in jiu-jitsu, right? Like those people who get foot locked a lot, and now like, they wait a little too long. Now their foot gets stretched out. Now they have to tap much quicker to foot locks, just because like they continuously stress it, but never in a way to actually make it adapt to get stronger. It's just, now it's a problem.
Yeah. Well, I know from you, like I remember, years ago, I used to have this issue where I had two random issues that would pop up. Number one was like I would have these like muscle like spasms in my upper mid back, like in thoracic, where it's just like it would just all of a sudden it would seize up, and I would be like hunched over for like a couple days, as it sort of worked itself out. And then I remember there was one point where, man, my low back would get so tight if I was just up walking around. I remember we were in New York one time when I was walking around, and it would get so tight that I would have to like sit down. And this is like, I'm 29 at the time. And so I'd have to like sit down. Like I remember we're in New York and I'm having to take breaks as we're walking around town. And, I remember like two of the things that like, from working with you is like, one was like, I started stretching out all this stuff in the front, like my pecs and everything else. And, working on strengthening those upper back muscles. And which corrected my posture, which has, for the most part, I haven't had that muscle spasm thing in like years, like probably like 5 or 6 years. And then the hip thing, like working on more hip extension, strengthening that hip extension, and then loosening some of those hip flexor muscles up. So, because we're in such hip flexion all the time, and that sort of helped take away that back issue where, just the other day I was kind of thinking back about it. I was at like a competition on my feet all day long. My low back's fine. And so it's like, again, and I do those kind of religiously to the point where it's like just a little bit every day seems to help kind of keep all of those issues away. And so, kind of going back to you guys, for anybody listening, like it's really useful to like have someone kind of be able to, who knows how the body works. They can like literally look at you sometimes, and they can just like, oh, you're probably messed up here, whatever. And then, because you guys see the body in a completely different way than we do. Right. It's like watching like a really high level black belt watch two people rolling versus a white belt. They see different things. They look at it on a completely different level. If you get someone to assess you and they can help you sort of target a couple of areas that you have some issues with, it becomes this thing where, okay, this is the maintenance that I need to do on my body, not like some random thing that I'm guess working on the internet. It's like, no, this is tailored to me. And I do these exercises. It takes like, 10 minutes or something out of my day. And then, I don't have issues all the time. It's nice.
Absolutely. For sure.
Mike, what about like, as far as some key concepts, and I've kind of got some ideas, but your thoughts on maintenance. What do you like to tell people to do, or what do you like to recommend to some of your clients or even athletes that you work with, just to keep their bodies together?
Sure. So, cars, control articular rotations are great, because like when it comes to exercise, right? Like Chewy said, like his hip flexors. So obviously if I just say everybody stretch their hip flexor, well, not everybody needs it, right? But what's
Correct.
cool about a car is essentially it's so easy to tailor to you, like without even knowing the person. Just do it in your pain-free range, isolate a joint. And I think that's a really good way to train and kind of like maintain joint health. You have to think too, like jiu-jitsu, like there's certain movements that not like everybody needs if they're like a desk worker, but in jiu-jitsu, it's super important. Like having abnormal hip range of motion, like that's super critical for a guard. Like you said, jiu-jitsu is for the most part a flexion base, not just from a hip flexion, but a lumbar flexion. Like we're constantly curled up like a ball, having good shoulder rotation, like people cranking your arm with a Kimura Americana, even something simple people don't realize, like even if you have like an underhook and they have an overhook, like, there's that old school, kind of like overhook shoulder lock, like people forget about that one. You know what I mean? So I think just cars are a great way to maintain that, because if you take a lot of like traditional strength and conditioning, people are just doing like linear movements, sagittal plane movements, but like a lot of these injuries are happening in these rotational planes. So cars are just a super easy bang for your buck way to kind of maintain joint health.
Yeah, and that's a lot what kind of Chewy as part of the warm up. We kind of do some of that, and then we do some end range kind of contract. So isometrics, or contracting, relaxing the muscles. And I think it's a good way to keep cars are great because they do a number of things to help you assess your joint, so you can kind of see where your joint is restricted. You can see if there's any pain. You can also, it's a good way to kind of like bring some attention to a specific joint. And in jiu-jitsu, if you've got, like I said, somebody's got your shoulder, isolating your shoulder in a certain submission, or even if they're even dealing with some kind of leg lock or something, they're going to isolate that joint. And if you don't have the motion and also the control and the capacity to know what your joint can do and what it can't do, that's where you can get injured. So those are like, and we kind of, I don't know how we stumbled upon that, because we both started doing the same type of training, the functional range conditioning, all that stuff. How did you find that, by the way? Because it just stood out to me really interesting. And then I kind of started doing like studying, and that's kind of tailored a lot of my treatments to my athletes.
Sure. So when I was first a PT, I was in LA, and I had a coworker who was like one of the first influential like PT content creators. So she had kind of mentioned it. She was friends with Hunter Cook. So Hunter Cook's one of the instructors of FRS. And then, I was like, all right. Then they had a course that was coming to California. Luckily, California, there was a lot of courses when I was there. So then, once I took my first one, I was like, this, in my opinion, this is really what physical therapy should be. Like right off the bat, and then I kind of just went down that train and kind of like start taking all their classes. So their manual therapy courses, assessments, their strengthening, kin stretch. That's kind of how I found it.
Yeah. I don't know where I don't even know where I saw it. And it just like, it's crazy because I was like already starting to do some of these things like on my own. I was like, oh, well, if somebody's putting me in a Kimura or Americana, like I want to have some strength there. So strengthening at the end ranges. And then I don't know, somehow I discovered, and it was like, they have like a whole system. I was like, oh shit, they've just taken all the like, I just had the same line of thinking, and I happened to stumble upon, I don't remember when. And it's just kind of really affected how I've started. I just think it's useful, and it tailors well to jiu-jitsu. And then some of the people that train and do that style of instruction that you go do the courses, they're actually jiu-jitsu black belts as well. They utilize it. And so I was like, man, the more control you have over your joint, especially at end ranges where some of these injuries occur, the better off you're going to be. So, I mean, it's not just about being able to stretch a certain way or move a certain way, but can you control your motion? And do you have good control at those end ranges where your joints completely like, stretched or pushed to its full range? So I think that's huge.
And like, you know how, for people like will describe jiu-jitsu as like involuntary yoga. Like we're all black belts, right? Like I'll be training obviously, cause I'm not just going to roll up all the people I train with, but like, even if I'm saying, okay, I have a shoulder injury, I'm not going to let someone put me in a weird position. Like that's how jiu-jitsu is. Like my arm is going to get put in this position whether I want to or not. Obviously, based on skill, I can try to minimize that, but like it's just going to happen. So as opposed to just saying like, oh, I don't want my arm in this position, make sure that if it is there, like it doesn't explode, because just stuff happens. That's how jiu-jitsu works.
So here's a question for you guys. I feel like anytime you talk to someone who, really goes through the process of becoming an expert in their field with something that, when they're on the internet, there's lots of things that drive them bananas. You know what I mean? Because even like for us, it's like black belts, right? We're all black belts. And sometimes you just look at stuff that's being shown and you're looking at the technique. You're like, oh my God, that's like just, it's whatever. But for you guys, is there anything that you see online, that pertains to physical therapy or, working through injuries or whatever, any of this sort of broad general stuff that you guys are doing that just drives you bananas?
I got two.
Okay.
So I'll start with the less provocative and then I'll go to the more provocative. So knees over toes.
Okay.
And it's not that the knees over toes, like there's some really good things that he does. I think single leg training's good. I think training through a full range of motion's good.
Yep.
I really like that. There's certain movements like a step down, like I use that. It's awesome.
Okay.
The problem is like he's a trainer, right? And he's like, I had knee injuries. I can do these crazy circus tricks. If you follow my program, you can do it too.
Yeah,
and that's not true. That's not true, right?
Right.
And so then what happens is because he's a personal trainer. Now there's these people with all these different knee pathologies, meniscus tear, ACL tear, kneecap pain, and they're all doing the same program. But from a physical therapy standpoint, like I don't give everybody the same exercises. It's based on how they present. So like for me, like I've worked with plenty of people who are like, oh, I tried knees over toes and I made it worse. Well, because I don't think it's meant to be used for an injury. And I don't even know if that's what he originally intended it for, but that's how now it's marketed as I have a knee injury. Let me do this program. Sure. And I don't think that's the way to go.
Yeah, because I mean, that was the whole thing, right? That was the selling point, right? Sure. Was, I couldn't do this, and look at me now, I'm jumping really high and everything else. And so people see that and, it's one of those things where it's like, it's cool. Like if you can do that, that can be sometimes proof, or if you've helped other people, that's fine. But every situation's different, right? Like, if you got business advice from a guy who sells really high-end, expensive something or other, and he's like, well, I've made like, this many millions of dollars, and this is like, here's my product, or here's my course or something. But, you're selling like how to knit or something, you know what I mean? You're probably going to have very different, like it's a whole different situation, probably going to make very different amounts of money. And, with our bodies, everything's very different and unique. And so, like you said, the program might work for you depending on what you want to do. But like you said, with an injury goes, you want to get someone who can tailor the program to you rather than saying, oh yeah, hey, just use the same program I give to everybody.
Yeah. And another thing to keep in mind with the knees over toe, and this is interesting. So he pushes the knee and a healthy knee should be able to go over the toe. The problem is if you have a painful knee, forcing it over your toe is bad. That's where the cue, don't let your knee go over toe. And that's what happens in the rehab world where there's like this cue that just doesn't go away. Like when your knee's painful, don't do it. However, just from like, I'll try not to get too nerdy in the anatomics, but essentially as you kind of like get deeper in a squat, it puts a lot of pressure on your kneecap. One of the things that he doesn't really advertise is he did have what's called a partial knee replacement. So he has an artificial kneecap. So what they did is they shaved the kind of the bone away. So a lot of knee over toe pain is when someone has kneecap pain. So a lot of the program that he does, he probably would not have been able to do if he didn't have that surgery.
That's interesting. It seems like that's something that I
wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, it seems like that's something that, like, especially if you're talking about like pain-free knees, like, hey guys, like had my knee partially replaced.
Yes.
That sort of seems like something that would have been, marketed. Obviously doesn't help the marketing, but it's but yeah, I mean, I didn't know that at all either.
Yeah. So that's, I don't know if you want to add anything to him before I move on.
I don't know. People ask me about the programming, and I'm like, the ideas are good that you should be able to go through a full range of motion. Like I said, not everybody's going to be dunking a ball or whatever, but you want to move within your comfortable range. And yes, if you're doing jiu-jitsu, you need to be able to have full range of motion. You need to be able to get in a deep squat. If you're going for a takedown, your knees got to bend, pretty full. So, I mean, I think the points are there, but how we get there is very different. The path we take, you may need to do a little bit more of building resiliency in the tendon or the tissue or tolerance. And it can't be it's it's not a one size fits all. So yeah.
Well, sure. Like you guys are saying, like we're getting the knees over the toes. There could probably, I mean, I'm sure there are lots of different reasons as to why that wouldn't happen. Maybe pain in the knee, tight ankles. I mean, whatever, right? There's all kinds of stuff that could impede it. And if you're not addressing your specific problem or problems, then, you know, you're going to be doing a program and then, you know, it may not help you at all.
And pain is a very good indicator of you should maybe modify or adjust. I mean, always listen to your body. That's what I tell people all the time. Listen to how your body feels with doing certain movements. And that's really important, because if you have recurrent pain with something, you're just pushing through the pain, quote unquote, that's not a good idea, because you could just make a mild problem into a, you know, pretty significant problem that won't go away. So
yeah. And then with his success, now there's like these other trainers. Now there's a guy that's like the low back guy, and he's like, I had a herniated disc, and now he's doing like a weighted Jefferson curl, which, you know, it's like what's the worst thing to do if you had a herniated disc? Like, that's literally the thing. So obviously, you know, for something like, you know, there might be a reason you're going to program that, and like, especially for someone like a jiu-jitsu athlete, but like the person doesn't do a good job of saying, like, you know, the you know, how you get there. So I feel like it's this dangerous trend where I don't like these trainers that are just, this worked for me, do what worked for me. Because not, I mean, and then they're trying to make all this money. I remember I commented on one of these guys. I was like, this would be a terrible exercise. And he had like an auto comment, which was selling me his product. I was like, this tells people really where he's at. Like, he's not about helping people. It's just selling his content. I'm like, this guy's such a clown. So.
Yeah, well, and the thing too is, like you said, you're not giving people the full picture, right? So, you know, okay, you get your knees over toes, and again, I have no issues with a guy, do whatever you're doing. But if you're had a partial knee replacement, you know, okay, well, you know, I think a lot of times too, people maybe, how long did it take you to do these things, right? Because I think a lot of times people, you know, they'll watch something on social media and they go, I'm just going to go do that. And so then they go in there into the gym and they start trying to drive their knee over top on a wedge block or something. And then with the back thing, doing the Jefferson curl, you know, some guys like, oh, herniated disc, it worked for him. Like, instead of, you know, this is going to take years to sort of work through. No, man, let's just go try that exercise that I saw on the internet, because everybody wants a fast fix. And, you know, it's generally, especially when you're working with the body and injuries, it's not a fast thing.
No, absolutely.
Mike, what's your other thing?
Okay, Anaconda Brace. The biggest thing I have with Anaconda Brace is just their marketing is so extremely unethical. So it started, they had some post saying, oh, I had an ACL reconstruction a month ago. I put a brace on, I was able to go to class.
Oh my god.
And like, I mean, you know, like Eugene knows, like, you know, ACL reconstruction, you're looking at like 9 months, like, you know, 9 months for full rolling, right? And you know, maybe you're doing stuff slightly before that, but for the most part, like, you shouldn't be anywhere near the mat at a month.
It's going to be a while.
Yeah.
And we had a guy on the mats. How long?
A little over a month, and I was like, no, you don't.
We were doing takedowns,
like
leg sweeps, and I was like, dude, I'm not rolling with you. Like, I'm not like, you shouldn't be out here. You can do whatever you want. I'm not your provider, but like, you know.
So anyway. I get real, just the way that they're marketing. Like, if you didn't know any better, you're like, oh man, I have a knee injury. I'll just throw this knee brace on, and it allows me to train. And obviously, like you said, there might be some advantages in you know, for putting on a knee brace, depending on how bad the injury is. But if it's so bad, like, you like need a brace, you probably shouldn't be on the mat. And you know, like, their marketing is just so over the top. And I feel like it's like almost like a predatory marketing, because like jiu-jitsu people are just so they just have to be on the mats, where they just need any type of encouragement. Oh, well, you know, I have this major knee injury, but I'll just throw a brace on and now I can get back to training. You know, and obviously I'm a physical therapist, so like, you know, there's some injuries where maybe you put a brace on, it allows you to keep training. But like I said, if it's so bad that you need the knee brace, most likely you should not be on the mats.
Yeah, well, especially if you're worried about, like, you need some heavy, like, you know, if you want to slide a knee pad on sometimes because of the warmth or whatever, fine. But like, when you're thinking about, like, maybe you have a lot of instability in your knee and you're thinking, I'm going to wrap this thing around. You know, and I was talked to Eugene about this before, like a knee brace that can really give you like real support. You know, if your leg's unstable, is going to be very bulky. You know, a little bits of like Velcro in some little wires or something. It's not going to keep your knee stable if you start getting into a good roll.
They have like ACL sports braces. Those are custom fit, and they have huge kind of like metal brackets on the sides and hinges, and like there's no way you can train with that thing. It's huge and bulky. You'll see it a lot, like for anybody that doesn't know what those kind of look like. They'll use them in football as kind of preventative.
Was that Stone Cold had those?
Stone Cold had those. Now I don't know like how good they are, but usually people aren't doing that. They're already like at probably 8-9 months out, or even like at least 6 months out, wearing those braces, doing these return to sport things. So not even using those things at the beginning. So those are kind of as you're getting to end stages of rehab and stuff. And the other thing with ACLs, like Mike said, 9 months. Like that's the research just shows, regardless, like 9 months is a good starting point, but even go to a year or even longer, that your risk of re-injury goes down. So
so I mean, specifically with ACL, like 9 months is when re-tear rates are pretty much plateaued. There's an interesting article that was like looking at like pro soccer players. So even when they go back at 9 months, it's over a year before they're pretty much at the level of like their other teammates. So like you're good to go back and you might not get re-injured, but you're not really as good as you are. That's what's so for me, like if I'm working with an athlete, like 9 months would be like just when I'd be like, okay, now if you want to get ready for a competition, now let's start doing like competition training, however, like 2 months or whatever people want to do before I would say, okay, like go back to competition.
I mean, well, and that's the thing too. Like you said, we're jiu-jitsu practitioners. They just want to be back on the mats. And I remember when I had a very minor surgery with my meniscus. I remember like because they had to shave it down because the damn thing was flapping around everywhere, and there was no they were like, we're not going to be able to repair it. So for me, it was like, all right, like if I'm going to get back to this, I need to make sure that I'm really like intelligent about how I come back, because I've screwed up some injuries. This was when I was like 29, and I wrote out basically out for like 12 weeks, like before I even really started coming back to doing much of anything. And it basically gave me a plan to say, this is what I'm going to do. And that was mostly from like being around you a bunch, but wrote it all out. I was like, all right, here's what I'm going to do. And I'm not even going to really entertain the idea of getting back to any real hard rolling until about 12 weeks or so out, depending on how I feel by that, that point. But had to give me something to keep me accountable, because otherwise we're all a bunch of freaking idiots, and we'll be like, I kind of feel pretty good today. Let me like go roll, and then all of a sudden re-injure it, because I did that when I was younger with my knee years ago.
You had another, so you got two meniscus
one when I was 19, when I was 29.
And one you kind of went back just like a couple weeks after training.
I think I competed like almost just about a month out after I got done with the first one, and and again it did not heal all the way properly like it should have, and I lost a few degrees of extension in my right leg. So
I mean, and that's why like me and Eugene, like one of the things that like being physical therapists, like we can help guide people, just like you said, jiu-jitsu guys, they're just knuckleheads. They just want to go, oh, it feels okay, I think I'm going to go back, versus giving people very specific guidelines on what they can or can't do, or how, like you go to your physician, they're like, okay, you can go back to training, but just go back light, which doesn't really
they don't know what we're doing.
No, they and even then, like how often have you gone with someone, oh yeah, let's go light, and then they try to kill you, and like, guy, you said go light and you're not going light, you know what I mean? So like having guidelines of essentially how to get back to training, where you go from like, can you even just starting like watching class is a good way to kind of like stay involved if you have an injury, right? So you don't feel like you're going to forget everything, but then kind of progress from the different intensities of rolling before we get back to like full competition rolling with takedowns.
Yeah. And Mike, we've kind of we actually got to work together on a course. It's on BJJ Fanatics called the Mat Return. And we kind of decided like, well, we can't diagnose people or take them through their rehab specifically, but what we can do is like show them things for mobility, show them like, here's some things to look out for. Here's red flags, or if these are going on, these are kind of pretty serious things to assess. But we also made guidelines like, hey, here's this thing. Can you do this thing? Can you do these movements? That these are important kind of tests for you to do. So we started to develop this like course with like, how can we first of all give somebody things for maintenance? How do we give you things for body maintenance? So those cars, and then here's like these ideas, these movements. Can you do this movement? That's a good sign that you're on the right track. And then we actually did specific testing.
Yeah.
If you can do this test, then that will clear you to go back, or give you more confidence. We can't clear you to go back. We'll give you more confidence. So Mike, about that, like what was, let's kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I guess, the course is, obviously not everyone's going to have a physical therapist that's a black belt, so it just like, how can we give, a jiu-jitsu athlete a little bit better awareness so they're like less of a dummy when it comes to injuries. So, the first part we talk about red flags, where someone has knee pain. How bad is it? Well, like, we can't tell you, but we can say, if you have these signs, go get it checked, right? Because it might be like just something mild, but it also could be like you just tore your ACL. So, a pop doesn't necessarily mean you tore your ACL, but like there's some signs. So we kind of go over some red flags to kind of give people an idea. Go get checked, right? We have some good movement screens. So, like I talk about these older jiu-jitsu black belts that just like their body just becomes so gnarled because of all these injuries, right? So it kind of gives people a better idea of, hey, like, can you do this? And if you can't, maybe this is something you need to work on. Like so many, like just the easiest example, there's so many black belts I know who can't straighten their elbows just from years of just not tapping the arm bars, So then we kind of like go joint by joint, and then we include some like sport specific movements, which are these compound movements, which are very specific to jiu-jitsu. Like kneeling is a really important one that I do. Like, can you fully kneel? That gives me like a good idea of like where your knee is at before you go back from a knee injury. And like I said, we went through cars. So those joint maintenance we talked about, we have a full follow along routine. So if somebody wants to, they would like to have the same routine that we're all doing, it's on the course. And then we show some drills too. Some kind of, as I'm working with someone before we go to live training, which is the fun stuff, like we kind of go a progression of drilling. So I have to make sure you could do something one on your own before we add a person. So we kind of have a progression of solo drills to partner drills. And then we have some return to sport tests that we use before we clear an athlete to go fully roll.
Now here's something for you. I know this one will probably, maybe you'll be like, Eugene, this will be a hard question or slightly frustrating to try to answer.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, when you work with jiu-jitsu athletes, or if you're on the mats and you're observing people's, movement abilities, are there common problems, common issues that you see amongst jiu-jitsu athletes?
Common, like from like they can't do a movement, or
just like common issues, like basically like, essentially, you're either working with a jiu-jitsu athlete and they have a particular problem, or you're on the mats and you just notice like, oh, this person can't, kneel a certain way, or they can't put their foot a certain way. Or people seem to have issues with their posture or something. Are there any particular issues that seem to plague the jiu-jitsu athletes and jiu-jitsu community more than others, in your opinion?
Yeah, elbow, big one. Like I said, people can't fully straighten their elbow out. And that's a problem, obviously, if you can't straighten that. One, less time to tap from an arm bar at this point. Two, if you can't fully lock your elbow, it's going to be very hard to do like a strong base, right? You can't really base out. So that's, and then you try to base out, and because your elbow doesn't straighten, now you might hurt your shoulder, right? So that's a common one. Sometimes there's like a movement, like there's certain movements out there that not everybody has the body for, like inverting is a big one, but like you go to a class and the instructor's teaching inverting and like the student can't do it. They don't know that. So they're trying to force their body into these movements that they probably shouldn't be doing. I'll see that too with rubber guard, but like rubber guard is obviously taught primarily by 10th Planet. So it's like not everybody's going to be like forcing their hip in that range of motion. But I would say those are probably the two biggest that I see.
So with the fully like locking out of the elbow, that's something I've seen over the years with some of my friends who, in their own words, they just didn't tap and they get their arms popped and they eventually had to have surgery to remove bone spurs. If someone's starting to notice, that they're in training, they're getting, into this stuff, that all of a sudden their elbows are starting to lose degrees, is there anything that they can do to sort of try to get that back before it becomes like, they get the Bob Dole arm that doesn't fully extend, That's a joke that you're only going to get if you're like 32 plus or something.
Yeah, I mean, so elbow control articular rotation is a good just maintenance, making sure, because now you'll have a little bit more awareness of that loss of range of motion. And then if it's bad enough or it's painful or whatever, I would probably say see a physical therapist. We can include some other stuff. Like I would do like a forearm palm rail potentially. I might do like an elbow joint mobilization to kind of minimize that. But like the longer it goes, the problem is, like you said, it's a surgery thing. Like essentially, like the bone starts to deform, and then you have these little bony osteophytes in the elbow joint. At that point, no amount of rehab is going to do it. You got to go in and cut it out. So those would be like two easy approaches for people who are realizing that they don't have good elbow motion.
Yeah, as long as you realize it earlier rather than later. You know what I mean? Yeah. Be proactive about it. And the other thing is you need to know if it's a joint issue or if it's a muscle issue. So we there's a way we can assess that based on where your discomfort is or where the tension is in the joint. Yeah. So if you're bending your elbow, for example, or bending our elbow, if in the front of the elbow pit and you're feeling pain there, that could signify that it's a joint issue. Not always the case, but commonly. And then if you feel in the back of the elbow a stretch, that means it's maybe a soft tissue, maybe like it's a tricep or something at the back of the elbow. So it's knowing, is it your joint? If it's your joint, you don't want to be cranking on that thing. You might need to create a little more space in that joint to move and then, work on full range of motion versus, if it's like your joint and you're just cranking on that sucker, you might even just make it worse. So you got to know if it's the bone, the bony articulation, or if it's the soft tissue around it. And that will kind of gear how you treat it. But being proactive is really important. If you're like, man, your elbow's just slowly starting to lose that extension, I mean, that could be if you get that a little earlier, it might be better. So
what about you, Eugene? What do you think? Do you notice like some common things in jiu-jitsu, whether again, whatever that might be? Are there things that you just see that either you have to deal with a lot because I know you work with a lot of like our guys at the gym, or things that you see?
I definitely think not everyone can invert or should invert. People have neck pain or low back pain.
I'm not inverting.
No, you're not. And
I'm almost 40, bro. Like that ship has sailed. I'm also like 200 plus pounds, right? So like, it's I think maybe like sometimes you have to think about like technical choice of moves, like each certain positions offer certain plus and minuses, and one of the minuses of inverting, like I remember I made this in a video and someone was like, well, Mikey Musumeci, I'm like, talk to me when he's 40, talk to me when he's 45. It's like, because it's like they were saying, well, he says he can invert, it doesn't hurt your back. I'm like, yeah, okay, like talk to me later. It's like, it's easy to say when you're like in your 20s. It's a different animal when you're in your 40s. It's like, just it is what it is.
Yeah, not everyone should be doing it. And if you are someone that inverts, maybe had an injury, you have to kind of be wise about that. You can't just get folded up by the big dude. You don't want to just choose who you do that with, and also work that back into your game gradually, and don't make that the thing that you do all the time, even if it was something. I do think, I don't know, it's just everybody's so different. I tell people, like, rotate the tires, do different things, work on different elements of your game, and honestly, like, tap early. Early. Don't wait till your arm's already locked out. You do enough of that stuff of getting your arm popped. It's
even like neck cranks.
I think crank's another one. Yeah.
Because, sometimes like people think of it like I'm being a bitch if I'm tapping her to a neck crank, because it's not like a full choke that's going to like knock you out. But it's like, man, like, maybe there's a time to eat it like a competition. But like when you think of what neck cranks do, like over time, if your neck's constantly being wrenched on, eventually bad stuff's going to happen, and you're going to, all of a sudden one day you're going to be holding out and some dude's going to, your neck's going to pop. So like, just tap to him, even if you could have got out of him, even if you could have held on, like just tap early so you can keep going.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an important thing too, is like, one, like you said, if we can manage an injury early, it's going to be way easier to wait. Like if you're like, I've been dealing with this injury for 10 years, man, it's going to take so much more work to get that better. So deal with injury early is going to help. But like with your neck crank analogy, like I think an important thing with like no-gi is like a lot of no-gi chokes, if they're not in right, they tend to be cranky. So people are like, well, I'm not getting choked, so I didn't tap. But it's like, man, like if my neck is still like wrenched like an accordion, like and if you're not getting out, if like you are not getting out, like why? Like it's training. Who cares if you tap? Like I think that's like as it actually isn't even as I get older. It's as I'm focusing because I'm teaching jiu-jitsu more.
Yeah.
Just like focusing on getting better at jiu-jitsu versus winning. Like nobody cares if you're the best in the gym. Like nobody cares. Focus on getting better at jiu-jitsu.
Right, and that's a great point because as we get older, we're I'm the only one in the over 40 club here. So
We'll join you soon, old man.
As we get older, like what's your purpose for training as well, right? Like, I mean, if you're getting ready for a competition, that's fine. That's one thing. But even if you're in competition or in masters division, who cares, right? I mean, if you're in a bad spot tap kind of thing, nobody wants to lose, but that's part of it. You might have a family and you're getting older and you want to maintain your body and stuff like that. You want to be able to train for till you're 60, 70, 80. So that's kind of the thing. Think of what your intentions are. And I think that a lot of what we discuss, it's an adjunct to your jiu-jitsu. Like you can make your jiu-jitsu better by working on some of these things that we're not feeling so beat up, and you can train at the intensity that you want to train at. So I think a lot of people, the big problem with jiu-jitsu athletes is they seek out help. They wait too long. They wait too long to get help.
That's most humans, right?
Yeah.
It is. But it's one of the things, like I think jiu-jitsu athletes are notoriously are willing to work through a lot of discomfort and literally come in there. Look, man, I fractured my arm years ago. I shouldn't have been training, but I put my arm in my belt and I trained one arm.
God.
I did that. Yeah. And you know what? It helped my guard retention and stuff, and it was fun. However, I would never recommend somebody do that. And if I had to go back, I probably wouldn't have done that myself again. But like, stupid thing, I wanted to train. I was a purple belt at the time. I think I was like, I wanted to train, and so I've done dumb shit. We've all done it, and sometimes we learn from mistakes. So
every time I did the hand in the belt trick, I got more injured. So
luckily I did, but
well, it's like anytime with like an injury, right? Like I've always noticed something that where if I get injured, they seem to come in like pairs or like threes. And I think it's because, like, talked to Eugene about it before, and it's like probably because you're compensating, because now we lose function over here. So now we're putting extra stress over here. Which then, like, I remember when I actually, right before I tore my meniscus cartilage when I was young, I had a spider bite on my left leg, and they had to cut out this big chunk of like tissue out of the side of my leg because of the recluse bite. And I couldn't really walk very well on my left leg for a little bit. And so I'm kind of hopping around all the time, walking in a very funny pattern that my body's never walked in. And then it was like next month, come back to training and just rip through the tissue. You're like, damn, that. So I've noticed that over and over again where I've had those issues. And even like my meniscus tear that I had later on was sort of preceded by an ankle issue. Pop my ankles, kind of a little funky, whatever. And then, sure enough. So, I think maybe there's something to that.
Sure. And the other thing is, like, once you're cleared, if your doctor tells you like you're cleared to go back, like, do it gradually. Yeah. Your onset, your return to training should be gradual because your body's like not conditioned. It depends on how much time we talk about. There's like a disconnect between your brain and your body. Your brain's like, oh, I can do these things. And your body's like, it's behind. It takes a little while to get it online. So I think, like, just give your body a little time to adjust, and it'll come back to you. You're not going to lose anything by taking an extra couple weeks to get yourself back to training. So
I mean, and that's something we talk about in the course, just like using like live training volume as a good number on accumulating more versus don't just say, hey man, I used to train 5 days a week, 30 minutes a class, that's like 150. I'm just going to go right back to that. It's just because your body, you're going to lose some of it. So gradually build up.
Yeah. Well, and we get, the bad thing is a lot of times, especially if you get injured when you're kind of on like a good run, you become very attached to that person that you are in that moment. You're like, man, I'm in great shape. I'm doing this. I'm beating this person. I'm rolling for, like a full hour straight or whatever it is. And then when you come back, and I think we've all experienced this in some fashion, there's that disconnect, and you have to, the ego has to adjust, and you have to have basically a firmware update, right? Like, man, you've changed. You're not the same person that you were a little bit, right? Like, you're holding a little bit more body fat. Your cardio is not where it was. You just got tired doing warm-ups. So maybe we just dial it back and we take lots of breaks and we roll kind of slow and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It just, but it's hard to do, man. Once you get a taste of being back to jiu-jitsu, you're like, oh man, this is awesome. You get that feeling you want to go after it, and like, so I did it, a little bit. All right, that's cool. I think I can go harder, and then you kind of you don't stick to the plan per se, and then that's how injuries occur. Like Mike said, number one predictor of injury is previous injury, and you're susceptible at that time. You give yourself a little time to work your way back, and I think we get so excited because we've missed training. We love training, all our training partners, and it's just once you get a taste of being back, you want to like get back to it a little faster than probably your body's ready for.
Absolutely.
So here's a question for you fellas. So like with that course you guys you made the mat return, I think it's titled, right? Yeah. What's unique about it, right? Because obviously, like, there's different things that are out there. So what is it what is unique about that course that could help someone, whether they're injured or trying to do, maintenance to their body because they understand the need that, hey, I need to do this early so I don't get injured. What's the sort of unique side of it?
Sure. Yeah. So with BJ Fanatics is obviously it's all jiu-jitsu, right? But like we talked about, like keeping your body healthy, good body maintenance, good awareness is so you can do jiu-jitsu longer. That's kind of like why we made this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So gives you an idea of if you have any problems, like if you're like, oh man, I can't do this, maybe that gives you an idea this is something you got to address. So now you can go talk to whoever, physical therapist or whatever. Like I said, we have our joint maintenance program to kind of maintain our body so that we can, I think all of us would like to do jiu-jitsu is like as long as Helio Gracie and like into our late 80s, right? So how do we maintain our body for that? And like I said, I think another thing is using those return to sport, because you go see your physician and they just say, go back light. And this is like a sad thing with even like most physical therapists, because they don't work with athletes. Yeah. They just do like a manual muscle test. They'll just push on your arm. Okay, you're good. Like that really doesn't tell you a lot. So we actually give you better objective tests that like I use with my patients to say, hey, you can do this. It's the same on both limbs. Okay, like I think you're ready to go back to jiu-jitsu versus just kind of winging it, saying, it's been like 3 months. You could probably go back and you'll be fine.
We kind of give you specific guidelines. Can you do this? If you can do this thing, you're probably on the right path. If you can't do this thing, that's a hard stop. If you can't, and you can compare and you can say, is my right leg as strong as my left? Or that's number one. But number two, like I think it's geared towards jiu-jitsu. It's geared towards grappling, the movements that you need to do. And also like there's specific drills for each segment. So if you've got a lower leg or leg injury, we give you certain things like, hey, here's the ways that it's going to kind of help your jiu-jitsu, help you get back on the right track.
Yeah. Here's one for you, bro. So do you have, off the top of your head and, put you on the spot here, do you have any like good stories of you getting a hold of an athlete who either, like you said, either came from a PT and he was not ready to get back to training, or maybe their body was just a complete mess and you helped fix them up or whatever, but like a good story of you being able to employ your techniques and your knowledge to get them back on the mats?
Sure. I've worked with a lot of jiu-jitsu people. Let me think about like one guy, so he's it's actually pretty inspiring because he's in his late 50s. He's competing still, like he's master 6, whatever. He won. He's a purple belt now, but he won Nogi Worlds as a blue belt. So it's pretty cool, But he's 58, 57, rolling with like these young college kids. So he gets beat up a little bit. But what's very interesting is his game is he has the inverting buggy choke game, which is wild for like a late 50s guy.
Yeah.
So one time, he came to me and he ended up hurting his LCL because he's doing so much hip external rotation, trying to do rugby guard. So he propped his knee, and then we kind of went from one, which is first we rehab the knee, right? Obviously, we have to make sure that ligament can handle this stuff. We want to work on his good hip mobility and strength because he was one of those guys that was super flexible, but he wasn't necessarily strong in these weird positions that he's putting himself in. Then we could talk about like sport, like jiu-jitsu modification, which is like, obviously he really likes choking people from bottom side control, which is like ultimately probably not the best strategy, especially in competition. I was like, let's work on your guard retention. Like, let's not even let people get there, right? So then I kind of graduated him from PTs, and he was pretty good. Then he was like, man, I'm tiring out, because again, he was a blue belt at the time, so he wasn't very efficient with his movements. And like, and this is one of the things that he forgets. He's like, I feel weak. I'm like, no, you just let somebody on top. Like, that's literally how jiu-jitsu works. I have gravity, right? So we worked pretty hard on his conditioning. And again, since then, he's virtually had no injuries. I think he did like have an ankle injury. He went into a tournament, and I think he went down. So he's like, what, in his late 50s. I think he had a match against a guy in his 30s who was like 40 pounds heavier. And then the guy did an illegal leg lock that the ref didn't catch. So, so other than that, he didn't have any injuries. And like, he's been competing pretty regularly. He just took, I think, 3rd at Master Worlds. He's more of a Nogi guy. Yeah. So we'll see how Nogi Worlds goes this year. But it's kind of a cool thing to see from, again, older guy dealt an injury, and just how he's, going from there. So that was probably would be an easy one to think off the top of my head.
That's cool.
Yeah. For me, I mean, honestly, like we talked about, a young kid who's a high level wrestler, and just like getting him in there, and like seeing, like, he was very strong, but like in certain positions, he was incredibly weak for his shoulder. Like, I mean, just vulnerable to getting injured. I was really surprised. So, like, building confidence in a young kid that's been injured, and having them like feel like their shoulder is one of their stronger areas of their body, and they're able to wrestle at a high level again. True. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. Cause I think like some of that stuff, if you don't take care of that stuff at a young age, it follows you. I mean, it's hard, it's easier to recover, obviously, as a young kid, it's easier, but like, that stuff will follow you if you get injured and re-injured. So like,
well, like you guys were saying, like your likelihood of getting an injury, a lot of it is sort of predicated upon, is it a previous injury? Yeah. And if it is, like, well, if you're not taking care of it, get ready to get injured over and over again. And that stuff begins to accumulate, where you could have nipped it in the bud back in the beginning, but you didn't. And so now it's sort of manifested in something far worse.
Yeah. Mike, what's your, what would you say, like, if you had to give yourself advice, or maybe somebody you work with, like, what's like your best piece of advice for longevity in jiu-jitsu?
2 things, which I already touched on: have an injury, get it addressed early. Don't let it become a chronic thing. 2, training is about skill development, not winning. Nobody cares if you win in the gym. Focus on just getting better at jiu-jitsu. If I had done that at a blue belt, I would be so much better than I am now. But like when I was a blue belt and a purple belt, I was that knucklehead trying to win gym rounds. But like, who cares, man? It doesn't matter. Try to get better at jiu-jitsu. That's all that matters.
100%.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Mike leg locked me a couple times. By the way, we rolled. He's legit. Yeah. He had a good battle with Evan. They went at it, man. It was awesome to see. But like, whenever you meet somebody, like, you're like, is he for real? Like, I mean, I don't know, is he for real? Like, we were like recording all day, by the way. We were recording our course. We got up Mike flew in late at night. We got up super early, recorded, and then they had, it was Sunday. So they had, we had a break for like open mat. Yeah. And we were sitting there at Starbucks, and we're just like, dude, we're both like exhausted. We're like itching. Like, let's go train. So we went and trained a little bit. So it was fun, because you kind of build a little bit of that connection. And you're like, hey, is this guy full of shit or not? Like, you meet people all the time.
Oh,
and, like, people run into, but Mike was cool. And we rolled a lot of people, and everybody had great things to say, and try to take my leg, but I tapped. So there it is. Yeah, but it was fun, man. We had a good time, and it's interesting to meet people. You never know how to like what they're gonna be like, right? So, but having a similar mentality on certain things, as far as like skill development and injury mitigation, stuff like that, it's a cool thing. And as far as like social media and stuff, is there certain, like, I try not to share specifics as well. We talk about that a little bit, like, giving people, I have a shoulder injury, what do I do? It's very much requires an assessment. If people want to like get a hold of you, Mike, and kind of work with you, where can they do that?
Instagram's probably gonna be the best. My handle, Dr._Kickass. And then from there, email, it's easy to find. I have my website, but that's going to be the easiest way to find me.
Cool. Nice. And then the course that you guys have that we talked about, where did they find that at? Eugene?
It's on BJJ Fanatics. I'll link it down in the show notes. It's called the Mat Return. It's me and Mike kind of taking you through a bunch of stuff that's our go-to bread and butter, stuff we work on with people. And so it's a way, like, if you don't have anybody in your area that really knows jiu-jitsu or understands, it's a way you can kind of even like take the course and show it to a physical therapist that you work with. Could be helpful. Give them an idea on how to, like, get you back. So
yeah. And guys, I'll share this from my own experience, right? Like, if you guys actually, something's jacked up on you, or you have some mobility issues to where like you can't do certain things, my thing, this is just be me, like if you have a couple nickels to spare, I would hire, like, whether Eugene and Mike both offer private coaching, and basically assessments and stuff like that over the internet. I would hire one of them, because it's like, this is something like, as I get older, and as you get older, right, like one of the things that you typically find is you got more money, but you got less time. Right. Like, it's like, we all know you got more money, got less time. And so, you can spend time and you can go through a course and learn it. And that's perfectly good. For me, like, I'm willing to spend more money so that I get more time back. And so for me, like, I found so much value in hiring coaches. Anytime it's like, if I find myself in an impasse, I need to learn how to do something or fix something or whatever it is. It's like, let me find someone who is an expert in that area. I pay you money, and then you show me how to fix this or improve here. And like with Eugene, he's kind of like my go-to guy. Anytime something's jacked up, I'm like, hey, Eugene, come fix me. And like, he'll show me some exercises, and it's great, because then it's like, there's no guesswork. I'm not looking on the internet going, my shoulder hurts, fix me, or YouTube. Here's what you need to do. Do these blah, blah, blah exercises, this specific stretch, hold them for this time, do this for 6 weeks. Let's talk about it afterwards. Even like Brandon Reed, my guy, my student who competed at the ADCC, back got all jacked up as he was picking Felipe off the mat, and then, returning him back to the ground with a big slam. Jacked his back up. He's doing a seminar tour basically in Canada. He's like got a seminar every single weekend, or every single day, excuse me. He's doing another one every single day. And I'm like, how's your back holding up? Because he's rolling with everybody for an hour. And he's like, great. He's like, I'm doing the exercises Eugene gave me. They're doing great. So again, I encourage you guys to, like, if you do have something jacked up, you don't have to use Mike or Eugene. You can use whoever you want, but they both know what they're doing. But hire a coach, get them to like give you some stuff and fix it. Again, instead of screwing around, and you can get it tailored to you specifically, just like a tailored diet or whatever it is that you need done. And it'll smooth out the process. It's much faster. And in the end, when it comes down to money, like, we all like money, everything else, but we would exchange a good portion of that not to get injured, wouldn't we? So if you can avoid surgery and all those things, why wouldn't you do it? So just an idea to chew on in case maybe you got something going on with you. So
very cool.
Rant over. Sorry, guys.
No, appreciate that. Chewy's a huge advocate for coaching, and I agree. Like, it's just your time and money. Like, those are like, how much time do you have? Is it worth this amount of trying to figure it out and trial and error, and just finding someone that knows? Like, we have a guy, Eli, who's does a lot of our nutrition stuff, and like, I know kind of how to eat, but I didn't know exactly what I need to eat to put on some muscle mass or get a little trimmer, whatever. And like, dude, this is what you do. This is how you do it. And then, so following through, having a coach and following through on what they tell you, and trusting that process is really important.
Yeah, absolutely, man. 100%.
Cool. Mike, man, thanks for being on, brother. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Anything else you got going on, man?
I don't think I have anything big coming up. So yeah, man, just, check out our course.
Yeah. No-gi Worlds. You doing No-gi Worlds?
We'll see. We'll see. I mean, I might do it. I'll let you know. I'll think about it.
Cool. All right, man. Yeah. Well, Mike, appreciate your time, dude. Thanks. And we'll talk soon.
Yeah, talk soon.
Okay, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. Again, lots of little takeaways. I was writing little notes down here that I take with me. And again, some useful ideas to take away with. And for any of you guys that are big on knee pads, I'm sorry.
What'd you learn, Chewy? Is there something that stood out to you about what Mike said?
Well, it's not something that he said, but it's something that I wish I would have applied to everything. Again, we talked about this before about like me being big on coaches, right? So with you, I remember when you started training at the gym 2009. So I remember when you started training at the gym, because I, as a young guy in my 20s, I used to have all kinds of injuries all the time. And I would just like look online and see what I could figure out.
Sure.
You know, let me figure out. I don't want to go to the doctor. Let me just figure out what I can do. And I'd gone to PTs. And I remember like one time I had a PT that I worked with when I had a meniscus tear and I could not straighten out my leg. And, you know, they have me friggin' stacking ice on top of it. And I'm doing the stem thing. And I'm like, you know, doing this whole thing all the time. And I'm like, you know, for the life of me, I was like, I think it's a meniscus tear. You know, because I looked up all the different symptoms and I was like, this is what was going on. This is what I think it is. And so I was like, eventually I was like, who's the main PT here? Because I'd been going for like 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
And I was not getting any more extension. So he does like a check on me for about 30 seconds. He's like, let's get an MRI scheduled. Lateral meniscus tear, right? Or is it the lateral on the outside?
Side, yeah.
So meniscus tear. So, you know, end up having it worked on. So my confidence with PTs was sort of, was not there. And now I started working with Eugene. He understands what we're doing. He's not trying to take me away from it. He wants to help me. And then when I start consulting him with injuries, all of a sudden I'm getting better. And so for me, and again, working with Eli as a coach, working with several people in business as coaches, I've just found like it's such a good benefit. And yeah, sometimes it's expensive, but it's like, you know what? Like, again, what would you trade? What is that worth to you monetarily? If again, I always talk about this. If you could just put some money in a little machine and it would pop out and instantly you could take this pill and whatever ailment was gone, how much would you pay for it? What is that worth to you? So the only difference is you got to do the work. But it made things a lot better for me. And, you know, from now, like I've had, knock on wood, because I don't want to make it a thing, but I've had less injuries from 29 to 39 than I did from 19 to 29. You know, I've had a lot less injuries and my body's in better shape and I'm able to train longer and I'm getting older. And so again, there's a lot of benefit to it. So just something, I guess not something that I learned, but again, just talking to him, right? Like getting an assessment. Instead of winging this thing, instead of searching on YouTube, what's wrong with me? Just get an assessment. Have someone look at you. Have them assess your body and say, hey, this is what's going on with you. Because it's a great education that you can learn about how your particular body works. And then later on, maybe you don't need them all the time, but you can understand how you work. So this way you can continue down the road and you can do your maintenance. And so it's been something that like, it's not something specifically that I learned on this, but it's something that he touched on that I think is important for a lot of people who sometimes don't value it. Cool. So that's my thoughts. But again, hopefully you guys got some idea from this and maybe got something to chew on for your jiu-jitsu. And again, thank you guys for being here. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. Again, if you guys want to go to their website, they're coming out with new products all the time. We're testing out some of their newer stuff. We'll let you guys know how we like it. You know, again, with CBD products, from my experience, it seems to work best if you're consistent with them for a period of time. Like it's like, you're not going to take it the first day and be like, whoa, like that's it. Like a lot of times it's more of like, I feel as though it's like after about a week or so when it's in my system. And again, this is my own experience anecdotally, right? I feel like, okay, I feel like the effects kick in a little bit more, but again, try whatever products you like on their website. And if you find something you want, use the promo code Chewjitsu, CHEWJITSU 30 to save 30% off the order. And then afterwards, send us a copy of your receipt to either our Instagram for Jiu-Jitsu Podcast or the Jiu-Jitsu it's Jiu-Jitsu Podcast at gmail.com. And we'll send you a free bonus series, video series as a thank you for doing so. And again, get yourself some CBD at a discount. Also, if you guys are wanting to get some new jiu-jitsu gear, rash guard, shorts, whatever, check out epicrollbjj.com. epicrollbjj.com. Say it a little slower.
There you go.
But again, if you get something if you find something you want on their website, use the promo code Jiu-Jitsu20 for 20% off. Again, for some reason, if you're in like a little slump, sometimes buying some new gear can kind of get you a little excited to train. It's something I do from time to time. And so if you want to save some money in the process of doing so, Jiu-Jitsu20 at checkout at epicrollbjj.com. Also, if you guys want to support the podcast directly and get a exclusive little bundle of videos and different content that we put out that's not available anywhere else, plus some other perks, you can go to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, along with the different things that we have in there, like recordings of seminars, stuff with the guests that we've had on that are not released anywhere else. There's also, pertaining to this episode, there's a couple of warm-up routines that Eugene made for over the last couple of years that he does at my jiu-jitsu camps. A lot of these movements that he does in these warm-up routines that are generally pretty short, under 20 minutes or so, or around 20 minutes, those are a lot of the movements that I personally do now, like as a warm up for classes, because I find a lot of value in it. Makes my body feel good. If I'm tight, I've been driving for a while, or I'm traveling, I go to these movements and I use them, and you can try some of them out and see how you feel. And again, it comes to you at a very inexpensive price as part of the membership to the Patreon. So if you want to check that out, patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, guys, if you are not a member of the Chew Crew and you don't get my daily email letter and you'd like to, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join up, I'll send you the daily letter that you can get, which you can unsubscribe from at any time. You'll also get access to a couple of free ebooks that I give away. They go into game planning for your jiu-jitsu competitions, whatever it might be, and also some drilling strategies to train with a very, very deliberate process. And again, you can take away one of those strategies and it can be very useful to you. And then I'll send you the letter, which has everything, just anything and everything that I want to talk about to you related to training and stuff like that and mindset. And then also too, you'll get exclusive offers that I don't release anywhere else. So again, any of that and more, if you want to check it out, chewjitsu.net/join. And so guys, with that said, thank you so much again for joining us. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next week.